At some point, something strange happened. Men went from dressing like they had somewhere important to be, to dressing like they're permanently on their way to the couch. And the weird part, nobody really questioned it. We just collectively agreed that hoodies, gym shorts and wrinkled t-shirts were good enough. Now maybe you've noticed this too. You walk outside, scroll online, go to work and it feels like men either don't care at all about how they look or they're completely lost, copying random trends that don't even fit them. And if you ever thought, man, I want to look better but I don't want to look try-hard or fake, you're not alone. Because this isn't about fashion, it's about how we lost standards, why that happened and how to rebuild them, without turning into a costume or a Pinterest board. By the end of this video, you understand exactly why men started dressing worse and most importantly, how to fix it in a way that actually feels masculine, intentional and natural. Let's break it down. There was a time when men didn't wake up and asked, what's the easiest thing I can throw on today? They asked something very different. They asked, what does today require from me? And their clothes answered that question. Back then, getting dressed wasn't about self-expression or trends. It was about function, respect and identity. Clothes were a tool, a signal, a form of quiet discipline. Men didn't dress well because they were fashionable. They dressed well because it was normal. A factory worker didn't wear a suit, but his workwear still had structure, proper fit, durable materials and a clear purpose. An office worker didn't own lazy clothes. His casual wear was a still pressed shirt, clean trousers, leather shoes. Even weekends had a standard, and this wasn't about money. This is important, so you don't gloss over it. Most men back then had fewer clothes, not more, but every piece had intention. You didn't own 5 versions of the same hoodie. You owned a work outfit, a social outfit, a formal outfit, and each one meant something. Because clothing wasn't just a personal choice, it was social. Your appearance to people, you respected the space you were. You understood your role, you took responsibility for how you showed up. There was an unspoken agreement in society. I'll put in effort, so will you. That agreement created standards, and that standards created something powerful. Self-regulation. You didn't slouch as much in structured clothes. You didn't act sloppy when you looked sharp. You didn't feel invisible when your presence was clear. There is an actual psychology behind, often referred to as enclosed cognition. The basic idea is simple. What you wear influences how you think, move and behave. Men back then didn't need studies to prove it. They lived it. Now compare that to today. Today a bad outfit isn't even considered bad. It's considered comfortable, chill or not that deep. But back then, a bad outfit wasn't expressive, it wasn't iconic, it wasn't a personality, it was a mistake. And when society treats something as a mistake, people correct it. When society treats something as acceptable, spreads. This is why this era matters. Not because we should copy old outfits, not because suits are magic. This is why this era matters. Not because we should copy old outfits, not because suits are magic, but because men once understood a core truth we forgot. How you dress is not about impressing others, it's about respecting yourself and the situation you're stepping into. And once that understanding disappeared, everything else started to unravel. Here is the important thing to understand. First, men didn't suddenly wake up one day and decide, yeah, I don't care how I look anymore. That's not how cultural shifts happen. This was slow, quiet, almost invisible. And that's exactly why it worked. Comfort became a value, not a side effect. After World War II, society changed fast. Life became safer, technology improved, work became less physically demanding for many men. And with that came idea, comfort equals progress. Before, this comfort was something you earned after responsibility. Now comfort started becoming something you were entitled to by default. Clothing followed that mindset. Softer fabrics, looser silhouettes, less structured. At first it made sense. Why wouldn't you want clothes that feel better? But here's a subtle shift that most people miss. When comfort becomes a core value, standards quietly step aside. Clothes stopped asking men to rise the occasion, they started adapting downward instead. Casual became the default, not the exception. Fast forward a bit. Offices relaxed their dress codes, Casual Fridays turned into casual everything, formal wear got pushed into fewer and fewer situations, and when rules disappear, most people don't replace them. They replace them with convenience. This is basic human behavior, without expectations, so they slowly forget how. Not because they're lazy, but because unused skills decay. This one is modern and massive. Remote work, online communication, digital social lives. You no longer had to physically show up to be productive, respected, or social, so clothing lost another layer of purpose. Why dress intentionally if meetings are on screen, socializing happens online, first impressions are delayed or filtered, the fewer moments where appearance matters, the less people invest in mastering it. Casual became permanent. Visibility decreased, each step made sense on its own, but together they created a world where effort looks optional and standards feel outdated instead of grounding. And once effort becomes optional, most people stop choosing, not because they want to be worse, but because the system no longer rewards being better. This is the foundation of the problem, because once standards disappear from the environment, they have to come from within. And most men were never taught how to build them on their own. This is where things really start to fall apart, because comfort culture didn't just change what men wear, it changed what men expect from themselves, and that's a much bigger problem. At some point, comfort stopped being a reward. It stopped being something you enjoyed after work. It became the default. Now you think about how most outfits are designed. Stretchy, soft, loose, forgiving. They don't demand posture. They don't demand awareness. They don't even demand that you stand up straight. And that sounds harmless until you zoom out, because standards work like gravity. You don't notice them when they're there. But the moment they disappear, everything starts to floating apart. Here is something psychology makes very clear. Humans naturally avoid friction. If two options exist and one requires less effort, your brain will choose it almost every time. This is tied to concepts like decision fatigue. We default to easy choices when mentally tired. Habit loops. Once comfort becomes routine, it reinforces itself. Energy conservation. Your brain constantly looks for shortcuts, so when society removed friction from clothing, men didn't choose laziness, they followed biology. Why dare wear structured clothes when elastic waistbands exist? Why think about outfits when neutral casual is always acceptable? Here is the real shift most people miss. Comfort culture lowered the bar of what's considered acceptable. Not excellent, not sharp, not intentional, just acceptable. And once good enough becomes the goal, progress stops. You don't ask, does this fit well? Does this communicate respect? Does this elevate my presence? You ask, is it comfortable? Can I get away with this? Will nobody call it out? When nobody calls it out, that becomes the new normal. This is how standards die. Not through rebellion, through permission. Here is something subtle but important. Structured clothing used to correct men. A fitted jacket reminded you to stand straighter. Stiff shoes changed how you walked. Tailored trousers controlled your posture. Now, modern casual clothes adapt to your worst habits. They don't push back when you slouch. They don't punish laziness. Comfort didn't just change style, it changed identity. When effort stops being invisible, stops being valued. This is why caring about how you dress now gets labeled. Trying too hard, insecure, extra, because in a comfort-first culture, effort feels threatening. Back then standards were social. Today, they're optional and private. That sounds like freedom, but it comes with a cost. Because when standards aren't shared, you don't feel pressure to rise. You don't get corrected. You don't get guided. You either figure it out alone or you slowly stop caring. And most men choose the second option, not consciously, but gradually. That's how comfort culture didn't just change wardrobes. It erased the invisible framework that once kept men sharp, intentional, and self-aware. And once that framework was gone, something else rushed in to fill the gap. Fast fashion. This is where things go from comfortable to completely careless. Because fast fashion didn't just make the clothes cheaper, it changed the way men think about clothing altogether. And once that happened, learning style stopped making sense. Buying clothes used to be a decision. You'd save for it, try on it carefully, accept it for last years, not months. You learned to think naturally. What fits your body, which fabrics breathe, what works with what What's worth repairing? Fast fashion flipped that on its head. Now clothes are cheap, replaceable, and everywhere. When a shirt costs less than a decent meal, your brain doesn't treat it as something to understand. It treats it as something to consume. And you don't study things you plan to throw away. Style is a skill. It takes repetition, feedback, small mistakes, long-term thinking. Fast fashion removes all of that. If something doesn't fit quite right, replace it. If it falls apart, buy another. If the trend changes, throw it out. There is no incentive to learn fit, proportional quality, because the system rewards speed, novelty, not mastery. So men never build a foundation, they just cycle outfits. Trend cycle replace personal identity. Fast fashion thrives on one thing: constant change. New drops every week, new aesthetics every season, new must-haves all the time. This creates subtle problem for men. You're never dressing as yourself. Instead of asking, does this suit me? Does this match my lifestyle? Does this feel intentional? Men ask, is this trending? Is this acceptable right now? Will this look outdated soon? That mindset kills personal style before it even forms. Fast fashion gives the illusion of freedom. Endless racks, endless options, endless styles. But psychology shows something interesting. Too many choices reduce satisfaction and confidence. This is tied to decision overload. That's why so many men end up with the same neutral colors, the same boxy fits, the same forgettable outfits. Not because they lack taste, but because they are navigating chaos. Here is another subtle but powerful effect. When clothes are cheap, mistakes don't sting. And when mistakes don't sting, they don't reach. Fast fashion removes consequence from dressing badly, and consequence is how skills develop. No feedback, no learning, no growth. The end result: men didn't get worse. They stopped practicing. This is important. Men didn't suddenly lose the ability to dress well. They lost environment. They encouraged learning. Fast fashion made style feel. This is where everything speeds up, because even if comfort culture lowered the standards and fast fashion erased the incentive to learn, social media finished the job by overloading men with options. No better option, just louder one. The algorithm doesn't reward good style. It rewards novelty. Here is something most people don't realize. Algorithms don't care about outfit, if they make sense. They care if it stops to scroll. So what gets pushed? Extreme silhouettes, loud contrasts, trend-heavy pieces, short-term shock value, subtle, well-fitted, timeless outfits don't perform well online because they don't scream for attention. So men end up seeing distorted examples of style. They think this is what dressing well looks like now, when in reality it's what dressing visibly looks like. Too much information, no foundation. One week it's minimalism, next week it's cork-pour, then vintage, Americana, then luxury core, then something new, old money. Men aren't giving them the built understanding. They're just told, buy this, wear that, don't do it anymore with no explanation to why. So instead of learning principles, fit, proportion, balance, men copy surface level aesthetics. And copying without understanding always creates insecurity. Because the moment the trend changes, your outfit feels wrong again. Identity fragmentation. Which version for me is this? This is the part nobody talks about. Social media encourage men to try on identities the same way they try on outfits. On day you're clean minimalist guy, next you're vintage workwear, high fashion guy, but none of it sticks because identity isn't built through experiment alone. It's built through consistency. Without that consistency, men feel disconnected from their own appearance. They don't recognize themselves in the mirror. And when you don't recognize yourself, you default to say forgettable clothing or stop trying altogether. Ever notice how style advice online feels exhausting? That's because it's not education, it's content, short clips, hot takes, absolute rules with no context. Never wear this, every man needs this. If you don't do this, you're behind. That kind of advice doesn't build confidence, it builds anxiety. And anxious people don't develop style, they freeze. The core problem: exposure without understanding. Here's the truth. Most men today aren't underexposed to style. They're overexposed without guidance. They see thousands of outfits but learn almost nothing. No principles, no framework, no grounding, just noise. When the noise gets too loud, the brain does what it always does. It shuts down and chooses the safest option. Neutral colors, generic fix, low effort, not because men want to look boring, but because confusion is exhausting. Why this matters more than just clothes. At this point, some people check out and say, it's just clothes. Who cares? And on the surface that sounds reasonable, but here's the truth, most people never sit with. Clothes are never just clothes, because people are never neutral. The moment you walk into a room, something happens before you speak, before you move, before you prove anything. Your appearance sets a context. Here is where it goes deeper. Clothing doesn't just affect how others see you, it affects how you behave. This is where the idea of enclothed cognition comes in. The concept that what you wear influences how you think, feel and act. And how you felt this before, even if you never named it. So you don't sit the same way in a sharp outfit you do in sweatpants. You don't speak the same way. You don't move the same way. Clothes quietly tell your brain how serious this moment is, how much effort is required, and how much you should respect yourself. When your clothes communicate, this doesn't matter. Your behavior often follows. Choosing not to care about how you dress is still a choice. It still sends a message. It can signal disengagement, low self-respect, lack of awareness, or simply that you opt out. Again, morally bad, but consequently, because people don't separate your appearance from your competence the way you hope they do. They never have. When standards disappear, effort feels pointless, discipline feels optional. Self-respect becomes abstract. Rebuilding style isn't about becoming fashionable. It's about restoring a system where effort shows, feedback exists and growth feels tangible again. Because when you respect how you show up on the outside, it becomes much easier to respect yourself on the inside. Now here's the good news. Rebuilding men's style doesn't require going backwards, wearing suits everywhere, or turning into some fake over-polished version of yourself. It requires something much simpler and much harder, a shift in philosophy. Because style doesn't collapse from lack of option, it collapses from lack of principle. So if we want to rebuild it, we don't start with clothes. We start with how we think about them. Principles are quiet. Trends, well, tell what you have to wear. When you chase trends, your style expires. Your confidence fluctuates. Your identity stays unstable. When you follow principles, your wardrobe simplifies. Your decisions get easier. Your presence becomes consistent. Principles doesn't change every season. Fit, proportion, balance, context, those worked 50 years ago, they work now. Fit is style, not color, not brand, not trend. A $20 t-shirt that fits your body looks better than a $200 t-shirt. Why? Because fit respects your body structure, sharpens your silhouette, communicates intention. When something fits properly, it looks like it belongs on you. And belonging is what creates confidence. Structure is supportive. Structured clothing gives your body a frame. It tells your posture where to go. It gives your movements clarity. This doesn't mean stiff suits. It means clothes that hold their shape, fabrics with weight, pieces that don't collapse when you stand still. Structure doesn't make you rigid. It makes you defined. Intentional friction beats mindless comfort. Here is a rule worth remembering. If your clothes require zero effort, they probably give zero presence. This doesn't mean suffering. It means choosing pieces that ask something of you. Shoes that make you walk with purpose. Pants that remind you to stand straight. Jackets that change how you carry yourself. That small friction is not a flaw. It's feedback, and feedback is how standards return. There is a difference between simple and careless. True simplicity is controlled. Neutral colors, clean lines, minimal noise. But every simple outfit only works if the fit is right, the proportions are intentional, the details are clean. That's why some men look sharp in basic outfits and others look invisible. This is the core idea, everything rests on it. Style isn't about intention, it's about alignment, and how you look matches, how you think, how you move, how you want to be treated. There is no friction. You're not performing, you're not copying, you're not hiding, you're leading yourself. No theory, no aesthetics. They just stopped being taught white matter. And once you see that, once you understand the forces at play, you're no longer stuck copying trends or feeling lost. You're rebuilding something deeper than style. You're rebuilding standards.